If you're neurodivergent, tarot and oracle decks can be a great tool for accessing your own self-trust, finding answers and clarity that you're seeking for, and banishing self-doubt. However, you might have had some struggles in trying to start a tarot practice or work with the cards based on typical resources and teachings. So in this video, I want to share some advice that I have for neurodivergent readers who are working with these resources. If you're new here, hi, my name is Avery, and I help justice-aligned, neurodivergent, and nerdy humans to cultivate ease and self-trust for growing into our emerging future. I wanted to talk about neurodivergent tarot practice, and I'm going to do a series of videos on this channel about this topic, so you can check out, try to remember to leave in the cards above, or just check out the recent videos on this channel to see those. In this one, I wanted to do a little bit of myth busting around tarot practice and what it looks like and how you might access it. Because I've noticed that in my one-on-one practice, working with neurodivergent clients as a neuroemergence guide, that a lot of folks can have some difficulties in accessing tarot practice because of the rules that they kind of perceive to be a part of practice, or even if they're looking at non-dogmatic kind of resources for learning and practicing tarot, it can just kind of be like, how do I get started? How do I access this? How do I build this into my life? Of course, neurodivergence covers a lot of different neurotypes and a lot of different ways of cognitive processing, how we process information, how we relate to our intuition and our bodies, and other things that could relate to your tarot practice. So some of these tips may not apply to you, just take what you like and leave the rest. One of the biggest things that I find myself advising folks on when it comes to tarot practice is just keeping in mind that you can do it whenever the fuck you want to. So I like to try to keep a deck accessible to me. This is especially helpful, if you have ADHD or any sort of neurotype where you're finding that, you might out of sight, out of mind it. Having your cards feel really accessible to you and having the practice in general feel really accessible to you is an important start. So like right now I have on this table at my mom's house where I am right now, I just have a deck just sitting here, right? It's not even in the box. Obviously dust, pets, whatever, your mileage may vary, but I literally have these sitting out open because I know that like that will just remove a barrier for me, that I can grab it whenever I want to pull a card. I will admit that this is a do as I say, not as I do, because at home I often have, all my decks sitting lovely behind me. You can see in past videos where I'm sitting with a shelf of like 100 decks that I'm like never pulling out. So I do think that having that tarot deck in a place where you actually are, so not necessarily like a special spiritual table. I mean, sure, you can do that. You can have an altar with cards, but I find that actually like having that deck, whether it's your work desk, whether it's, the chair where you often sit in the evenings, whether it's on your nightstand, thinking of places where you might kind of be in your head, you might be thinking, you might be looking for guidance, so that you can just pull the deck whenever you want, can be really useful. Because I do think that you can go to your tarot at any time. So it does not have to be a particular rigid practice that's like keyed to a time of day, for example. A lot of folks will start out, and there's nothing wrong with this as a starting point, doing like a morning pull. But I noticed that sometimes, I even had a client recently say, oh, right, I can pull, tarot cards at times other than like in the morning. Other people might do an evening practice, keeping in mind that it doesn't have to be a highly ritualized thing. Of course it can if you want it to be, but for when we're trying to remove barriers and trying to make tarot or oracle more accessible to us, it's really, really helpful to think of it as I can turn to this at any time. I can have a deck of cards in my bag, I can have a deck of cards in my office, I can have it wherever, and it doesn't have to be a long drawn out practice. It can be as simple as just pulling a single card when you're in a state of, I could use some guidance or clarity or comfort right now, whatever it is that you're looking for. So considering it something that you can do at any time, remembering that if you do have a practice like a daily or weekly or monthly pull, that it's okay to miss one. Don't let that deter you, right? Like, I consider any daily practice, especially for someone who has ADHD, a daily practice means if you hit it 2 or 3 days a week, you're doing great. If you hit it 1 day a week, you're doing great, right? So definitely, if you do have that kind of a practice, not being deterred by missing it some, but also just like pay attention to how it feels for you. If you find that you've been meaning forever to do tarot, but you keep trying to do a daily or weekly practice, and then you get discouraged and it all falls apart, maybe consider whether that is the best way to do. If your neurotype is more kind of comes and goes in spurts, where your energy or your interest in doing something like pulling from a deck is going to kind of ebb and flow, wax and wane, then that's great. Just like acknowledge that. And maybe it's not going to be that kind of a practice for you. Maybe for you, it's more of a pulling cards in the moment kind of thing. Our most like heightened moments can be really good times to pull cards. So if you're feeling, anxiety, if you're feeling overwhelmed, if you're feeling stuck and unmotivated, I have a video with a simple 1 card pull that I often do for those moments. So if you're not really sure like what to ask, you can check that out. But you can really ask whatever's feeling present. I like to think of my deck as being almost like a friend or a therapist or a coach, where I can, without having an appointment, in that moment where I'm just feeling something, what is the question you really want to ask? What is it you really need? What is the support you need? I've often asked questions like, how can this be okay? How can I be okay in this moment? But it also doesn't have to be crisis. So you can pull cards also for just very mundane, what's some support or some guidance I can use today? What priority might I consider today? What's just something I'm not seeing right now about whatever I'm doing? Getting it so that it's not something that feels kind of precious or restricted can be really useful for folks with lots of different neurotypes, to just take some of the pressure off of reading and feeling like it has to be a certain way. You might encounter tarot teachers who say, you have to store your decks a certain way. You have to cleanse them every moon, something. You have to go through a ritual practice. You need to have a meaningful experience. You need to journal on your pulls. All of these things can absolutely be meaningful to you, but if they're not, then don't feel like you're not doing it right or you can't do it if you didn't do it. Like, I didn't cleanse my deck at the full moon, so I can't use it this whole month. Like, I don't personally tend to do that. It's totally up to you. But check in with yourself. And if those like kinds of admonitions don't feel meaningful to you, don't resonate with you, then just ignore them, right? Figure out what your relationship is to the tarot. And for a lot of people, it's a very sort of like, it's a casual friendship. It's a grab and pull. It doesn't have to be special. And it might be that sometimes it is. You might even have a deck that you tend to work with in a more ritualized way, and other decks that you tend to work with in the everyday. You can kind of pick decks that appeal to you, it doesn't feel like intimidating to work with. Can be smart. So looking for like visuals and decks that kind of feel like an everyday friend that you can just grab whenever. Kind of related to that, not having to ritual, not having to journal. You don't have to write things down. I think sometimes we can be drawn, and some of us have, neurotypes where we are really drawn to having a tracking practice, to writing things down, to analyzing our pulls. But I think we can also get bogged down in the desire to analyze, the desire to like hold information from all the cards we pulled, to notice patterns. That kind of like systemic analysis of a tarot practice, it can be interesting and it can be useful, but I also think that it's important that tarot is like very much a present moment practice. It illuminates things for us in the present moment, that while we might reflect back and find it interesting, sometimes expecting ourselves to track, to journal can be a barrier. I found that when I started my tarot practice, I was making a note of every single pull, even if it was just noting the cards, and often I was writing down a reflection. And because of that, I found myself not pulling cards because I didn't feel like also pulling out a journal. I didn't feel like writing it down. I didn't have the thing open on my computer that would track, so I just didn't pull the cards. And it was really freeing for me to start using my deck and to intentionally allow the thing to be a message in the moment that I would absorb in the moment and trust myself. And this can be hard, I think, with, some neurotypes, but trusting myself that whatever message spirit had for me, whatever I was absorbing in the moment, that I could absorb in the moment. And even if I didn't consciously remember it, even if I never analyzed it, I never went back, I never took action specifically on that thing, trusting that it was absorbed in some way. Sometimes I have clients who feel like they haven't done things completely, or they haven't really honored the cards if they don't either spend enough time sitting with and interpreting them, or if they don't take action, if they don't let that pull change their behavior. And there are a lot of people who teach tarot who advise that it really is about action, and that there always needs to be an action step, and that it's meaningless if there's not action. And I think that it can be useful for action, but also a lot of us struggle and have a really complicated relationship with effort and action and a need to do something. And so it's helpful for me to take that pressure off myself, to say that, if it's meaningful and it's meant to inspire action, then I just trust that I'm going to remember it when it's time to take action. I trust that, sometimes I do pull cards and it makes me think, oh, I'm going to do this today, or I'm going to notice this. Other times, something that happens to me a lot is that I don't remember the pull. If you asked me what did I pull this morning, I would totally forget. But later, when that pull becomes really relevant, when the image of that card suddenly matches to something going on in my life, it will pop into my brain. So, something that I think is really useful for neurodivergent people just in general, not even tarot, is remembering that the ways that our brains retrieve information and make connections, make associations, they might not be as predictable as they are for a neurotypical person. They might not be as consistent. We might fear, that our memory, the way we process information doesn't work as well because we can't just recall things that other people can. But I think that we often do make really creative associations that we find meaning in different ways. And so trusting that we will do that internally when we pull cards can just kind of take some of the guilt, some of the pressure, some of the shame, some of the conditioning that we might have, some of the belief that we have to do a spiritual practice right, can take some of that off. And just trust. A lot of times what will happen is if there's a message that the tarot was giving you and then you forgot about it and you need to receive it, you will keep pulling that card. Trust me, it will keep coming up. And often what I notice isn't the specific pull, it's the repeaters. It's the cards that I keep getting over and over again. Lately I've been getting Queen of Cups for several months and months. I've been getting Queen of Cups. I've been getting I'm trying to think what in the past few weeks. I think there was a couple of cards that I just noticed oh, it's there again. A Magician, I think, was one. You'll start to notice in the repetition, and I believe that this is true in general, that messages from the universe, you can't miss it if it's for you. I believe that you can't miss what's for you, period. If there's a message that you're meant to receive and you don't fully absorb it, it will keep coming up if it's right for you, if you need to receive it. And so just having some trust in that can be really helpful, and it can make it feel less scary to approach the deck feeling like you have to remember and you have to analyze everything. You also don't have to necessarily spend a lot of time thinking through interpretations. This is something where I think different neurotypes will probably vary a lot. For some of you, it may be that you feel the most meaningful connection if you really do spend a lot of time contemplating a meaning. You might not pull cards as frequently because you're going to spend a lot of time with a particular reading and you're going to think about those cards in different ways. It may be that for some people, journaling is really useful, writing about what you've pulled, or other modalities like voice recording yourself, videoing your reading, talking through them out loud. It might be that talking with someone else. I often find that that friends who are also tarot folks, it can be really like interesting to share what we've pulled and to talk through it. It might be that for you, reflection looks like creating art or just sitting with the image a lot. If you're a more visual person, I'm not really, but if you're a visual person, sometimes I've worked with folks where they might see someone else, maybe in a class, like see someone else working with their deck, and the way that person pulls out their journal and does a lot of writing and does a lot of like thinking through all the different meanings they know, and they're like, am I supposed to be doing that? Because they're more likely to visually reflect and to pick up on certain things in the image. That's a style that's totally valid. If you find that like when you pull cards, stuff jumps out to you, and then you go, oh shit, but like it's the Five of Cups, so like is that why did I notice this random little thing? That doesn't seem to jibe with the interpretations that I've learned, or that doesn't seem what I see, like my initial take on the card doesn't match the what I've learned about that card. It's totally up to you. You can decide that, like, and a lot of people teach that your intuitive take of the image is more important than the collectively understood meaning or the meaning over time. If that's where you're going with it, if that's what like jumps out to you and that's what draws you, and sort of like being with the image is more accessible to your neurotype, then great. That's how you read tarot. Congratulations. You might be more like me. You might be somebody who, I've definitely shamed myself before for being like, I didn't even notice what was in the picture. Like I literally just jumped to the words and like sort of half looked at the picture. Or I often look to what the card is. I know my meaning of the card, and then I will kind of compare the image to my meaning, and I will use the image to say like, oh, I think this version of the Five of Cups is pulling out this part of my understanding of the meaning, and so I'm going to read this one as being about that. But I don't think there's anything wrong with pulling the card, and visual just isn't your bag, and so you're just using the cards sort of as placeholders or as representations of the meanings that you're familiar with, and you're using the deck as a way to interact with that matrix of meaning. That's a completely understandable thing. So for some neurotypes, it may be that you find it really interesting and fun and an important part of your practice to do a lot of study and a lot of learning about different meanings and how they relate. For others, it's like, I don't want to do that. And I've talked to people who can kind of feel like, I don't really know the card, like this is what I think it is, but a lot of times people will be like, this is what I think it is, but you know the card better than I do. I'm like, well, you know your own intuition better. I personally believe that when we work with the tarot, it communicates to us in the way that works for us. So if you're a more visual person, right, the deck, Spirit might, if the two of us did the same pull, Spirit might give you a card that would communicate the message it wants to communicate in the language of that deck, in the language of the visuals, because it knew that would jump out to you. For me, it might give me the card that is more the sort of meaning that I know is going to match the message it's trying to give, if that makes sense. I believe that when we work with different decks, sometimes it's like, this is a different vocabulary of the language that Spirit is using to communicate. And so it might give you different cards from different decks because they would resonate differently for you. For some folks, the esoteric, symbolic stuff is really interesting, knowing the history of the cards, knowing, what every little like potential symbol is. I know a lot of people who just only work with, like, let's say the Smith Rider-Waite. They use like one deck, classic deck, and they're really into like the Golden Dawn interpretations. I don't do that at all. I'm much more like grab different decks that have meaning for me, and look for things that like have a lot of personal meaning and representation, that reflects my world. But it's totally like, it's very much a judgment call of what works for you. Sometimes also, I think neurodivergent folks can struggle with feeling like we don't have the same access that other people do to intuition. This might especially be true if you're on the autistic spectrum, or if you have a neurotype that in any way maybe you don't find it as easy to connect with, like, let's say your body and like your physical sensations, or you find that you have a lot of confusion and difficulty with clarity. You need a lot of like external cues. You might find that trying to tap into intuition, as many tarot teachers would advise, feels like, am I doing it right? What am I looking for? I'm not sure how I feel. What's like, what am I doing? So if that's the case for you, like, there's different ways to go about it. One is to understand that, and this is for me the most important, I think, is to understand that intuition communicates in a lot of different ways, and it communicates with you. It's your intuition in your language. So it doesn't have to be this like magical, mystical feeling kind of experience to be intuitive. I find that my intuition sometimes is the meaning that my brain jumps to first, right? Like, it's a spark of a brain connection. It's the words that occur to me. It's like often the times where people are like, holy crap, like the thing that just came out of your mouth. It's like, I find that when I talk, and it takes a while, but like as I'm talking through something, sometimes like really magical language will come out of my mouth and I don't notice it's happened. So I'm very verbal in that way. It might be that for you, memories pop into your head. References, like when you look at a card, you associate it with particular things. That might be how your intuition is communicating. It might be in your body. It might be physical sensation. But if you're not like feeling this sense of like, oh, divine is communicating with me, or, oh, I feel this like tug. A lot of times there's advice to like feel the kind of pull of like, what does a yes feel like and what does a no feel like? And I do think that exercise is useful for neurodivergent folks to like, what is your personal sense? Do you have a personal felt sense of like, what does negative and positive feel like? What does expansion and contraction feel like in your body? And knowing that personally can be useful. But if you try those kinds of exercises and you get nothing, it doesn't mean you're broken. It doesn't mean that you can't access intuition. It doesn't mean you're not accessing intuition. It just means that the way that you communicate with your intuition might be a little different. I find that the tarot is actually really useful for like accessing what's subconscious, or what I might not notice about a situation, what I might not be able to find, sometimes because of particularities of my neurotype. And it can feel like a very logical experience or a very systematic experience. Part of why I like the tarot is it is a system. It is like there are meanings to the numbers and the elements and things. And if that's the thing you connect to, then that's okay. That can be just as intuitive. But also, if you're finding yourself getting hung up on some of this stuff, and you're getting hung up on meanings, if you're getting hung up on the complexity of the tarot, you might want to try oracle cards. If you don't already work with oracle cards, an oracle deck, and particularly an oracle deck that has pretty simple keywords. So you pull a card and it's going to say something like joy or peace or despair or something, right? That's like immediately understandable. Or an oracle deck that has a full message printed on the card, so like has sentences, or has like an affirmation or something. That can be really, it can take a lot of the kind of pressure and like esotericness out of pulling cards to be able to just say, like, here is my message. So that might be something, especially if you're not having trouble pulling cards at all and you're getting hung up with the tarot, is to see if you can grab a deck like that, get your hands on. A lot of times oracle decks are less expensive too than tarot, just depending. But you can grab one of those, and just that can help you get into the habit of pulling a message. I find that often when I'm having trouble with tarot and I don't really feel like tarot, that I will pull simple one word type cards, and they will be very much like, oh, that was what I needed to hear, or that was a reflection or validation of what I was experiencing. It, like, that word felt right. And that, even just like having that experience can help you affirm your connection to divine, your feeling of connection with spirit, or however you conceptualize it, your subconscious. You can have that feeling of like, okay, great. Sometimes it's really nice to have the affirmation that it's quote unquote working, by having those experiences before you get into more complex pulls. So that's sort of just a dump of some of the ideas and some of the advice that I've given to other neurodivergent folks. Like I said at the beginning, neurotypes are all over the map. So if you have a question, if there's something that's been challenging for you with starting a tarot practice, if you're wondering about something related to your particular neurotype and just in general, you can leave a comment below. Feel free to ask me. I'm happy to help. I also do work with folks. I do tarot mentoring. I also do general neuroemergent guidance, working with neurodivergent folks and folks who are kind of in that general zone, whether you identify that way or not. So you can find information on that at my website below. And I encourage you to sign up for my newsletter, because that's when you'll find out when I'm making more videos like this. I'll probably do a couple more. I also have blog posts on similar topics, release free resources, and have offerings that come out. And so all of that stuff is going to be the easiest to find in one place if you do subscribe to the newsletter. So if you're not already, go ahead and do that below. And otherwise, we'll see you in the next video.